Questo servizio è inaccettabile. Porta subito qui il manager, incompetente.
Mi scusi, signore, ma deve calmarsi. Sono io la responsabile di sala.
The man at table 7, the one with the $150,000 Patek Philippe on his wrist and ice in his veins, was about to ruin her life. Elena Rossi could feel it. She just didn't know that he was also the only man on earth who held the key to unlocking her past. In the next 3 minutes, a plate of risotto would ignite a firestorm. A billionaire would shout, a waitress would break her silence, and a secret buried for 20 years in the hills of Milan would explode in the middle of London's most exclusive restaurant. This isn't a story about food. It's about revenge, identity, and the accent that changed everything. L'Étoile was the kind of London restaurant that didn't have prices on the menu unless you asked. And if you had to ask, you couldn't afford to be there. It was a temple of hushed tones, heavy silver, and starched white linen, catering to the kind of wealth that didn't need to be announced. Elena Rossi knew the choreography better than she knew her own name, which, some nights, felt like a blessing. She was a ghost in a black apron, efficient, silent, and invisible. Her chestnut hair was pulled into a severe bun that ached at her scalp, a deliberate act of erasing herself. Tonight, she was covering a double for Maria, who had a sick child. The extra £100 would barely make a dent in the black hole of her obligations, but it was £100. At 8:02 p.m., the restaurant's heavy oak doors opened and a chill unrelated to the November air swept the room. It was Alessandro Moretti. The restaurant manager, Julian, a man who had stared down royalty without flinching, suddenly looked like a nervous flamingo. Moretti didn't just have a reputation, he had a mythology. The Wolf of Milan. A tech and logistics billionaire who had devoured competitors with surgical precision. He was famously, brutally impatient. He moved like a panther in a bespoke suit, navy blue, probably a Keaton K50, sewn from vicuña wool. He was with a woman, Bianca, a model whose face was currently plastered on every bus in London, looking bored and sculpted. "They're on table 7, Julian hissed to Eleanor, his face pale. "Your section. God help you, Eleanor. Just perfection. Nothing less." Eleanor swallowed. Table 7. The best table, but the most exposed. "Yes, Julian." She approached the table, water bottle in hand, posture perfect. "Good evening. Welcome to L'Étoile. Still or sparkling?" Moretti didn't even look at her. He was scrolling through something on his phone, his brow furrowed. Bianca answered. "Sparkling, San Pellegrino, and make sure it's cold. The last time I was here, it was practically bath water." "Of course, madam." The first crack in the ice. Elena retrieved the water. She presented the bottle, poured. "This is not cold," Moretti snapped, his voice a low growl. He hadn't looked up. "Sir?" He finally lifted his head. His eyes were the color of dark, over-brewed espresso, intense, critical. "This bottle, it is tepido." He pushed it with one long finger. "Get another. And this time, put it in a bucket of ice for exactly 3 minutes. Not 2, not 4, 3. Elena felt the first prickle of heat. "My apologies, sir." "Right away." She returned with a new bottle, chilled precisely as requested. He ignored her, already deep in a curt, rapid-fire Italian phone call. Elena and Julian exchanged a look of pure dread. The appetizers, a seared scallop he dissected and left half-eaten, and the wine, a Garja Barbaresco he sent back, claiming it was corked when Eleanor knew it was perfect, were a tightrope walk over a pit of vipers. Bianca pouted, sipping her water, while Moretti radiated an aura of barely contained rage. Then came the main course. For Bianca, the Dover sole. For him, the risotto alla Milanese. It was the restaurant's signature, a dish they prided themselves on. Elena placed it before him, a perfect, creamy gold circle, fragrant with saffron and bone marrow. Moretti stared at it. He didn't move for a full 10 seconds. He picked up his fork. He took a single, tiny bite. He placed the fork down. The silence in the restaurant, which had been a gentle hum, became a vacuum. "What?" he said, his voice dangerously soft. "Is this?" "That is the risotto alla Milanese, sir," Elena said, her own voice barely a whisper. "This," he said, his voice rising, "is an insult." He pushed the plate, not violently, but with a cold, definitive finality. "This is not risotto. This is papa. Baby food. The rice is overcooked. The saffron is cheap. There is no anima, no soul." Heads were turning. Julian was frozen by the service station. "Sir, I can assure you the chef is a fraud." Moretti was on his feet now. His voice wasn't just loud. It was a weapon. "He thinks because he is in London, he can serve this slop to people who know no better? Does he know where this dish comes from? Does he?" He turned his full, unadulterated fury on Eleanor. She was the nearest target. "You!" he spat, jabbing a finger at her. "You serve this. You bring this poison to my table. What do you know? Nothing. You are a girl in an apron who knows nothing about my country, about my food, about my city." Elena was shaking. Not from fear, though there was that. It was something else. A humiliation so deep, so personal, it felt like acid. He was insulting her home. He leaned in, his face inches from hers. The smell of his expensive cologne was suffocating. And then he switched. He dropped the clipped, English-inflected Italian and fell into the raw, uncut, aggressive dialect of Milan's working-class streets. "C'è schifo," he seethed. "This is garbage. My nonna, who cleaned floors, could make a king weep with her risotto. You people, you stand here in your fancy rooms, charging a fortune for a memory you've never even had. You know nothing." And that's when it happened. The dam inside Elena broke. The 20 years of silence, of hiding, of being Elena Rossi, the quiet waitress, evaporated. The restaurant was dead quiet. Bianca looked horrified. Julian was halfway to the table. Elena stood up straight. The subservient curve of her spine vanished. She lifted her chin and looked Alessandro Moretti directly in his stunned, furious eyes. And she answered him. Not in English, not in textbook Italian. She answered him in the same, precise, hyper-local dialetto Milanese he had just used. But hers was different. It wasn't the dialect of the streets. It was the flawless, aristocratic, old-money dialect of the nobiltà, the kind of accent that hadn't been heard in common circulation for a generation. "So if your grandmother was so good," she said, her voice cutting through the silence like a stiletto, "why did she raise a grandson so boorish he doesn't even know what he's eating?" The world stopped. Alessandro Moretti froze. His mouth, which had been open to deliver another blistering tirade, snapped shut. The blood drained from his face, leaving behind a pallor that was almost grey beneath his olive skin. It wasn't just what she said. It was how she said it. The street Milanese he used was a badge of honor. It showed he was a popolano, a man of the people who had fought his way to the top. The accent she used, that was the accent of the Villa Reale, the accent of the families whose names were carved into the chapels of the Duomo. It was the accent of the people who had, for centuries, owned Milan. It was an accent he hadn't heard spoken with such casual, stinging authority since. It was the accent of his childhood nightmares. Elena wasn't done. The fury of a displaced, dispossessed Contessa was a terrible thing to behold. She took a small step toward him. You are right about one thing, signore, she continued, her dialect razor-sharp. The rice is wrong. It's carnaroli, but it's been stored badly. It's lost its starch. The chef used a powder saffron instead of steeping the pistils. And he used a beef brodo instead of a traditional veal. It's an amateur mistake. She pointed a single steady finger at the ruined plate. But you, she said, her voice dropping to a terrifying, velvet-coated whisper, you wouldn't know the difference. You just know that it's fashionable to be cruel. She leaned in, an echo of his own invasive gesture. You talk about your nonna? My nonna would have said you have the manners of a barbone, a stray dog. Now, if you'll excuse me, I will have the chef prepare a simple pasta with butter. It seems more suited to your palate. She turned, perfectly composed, and walked away. The entire restaurant, maybe 50 diners, 10 staff, had witnessed the entire exchange. They hadn't understood the words, but they had understood the tone. They had watched a gladiator be disarmed by a servant. Bianca, the model, was staring at Elena's retreating back with a mixture of awe and terror. She looked at Alessandro. Ale? What did she say? Alessandro didn't answer. He was staring, unblinking, at the spot where Elena had stood. His hands, resting on the table, were clenched into fists so tight his knuckles were white. He was not angry. Not anymore. He was in shock. The accent, the words, the authority. A waitress in a rented apron had just spoken to him in the voice of a Sforza, a Visconti, a Duchessa. He felt a cold dread creep up his spine. It was a ghost. He was looking at a ghost. Cisse, he whispered to the empty air. Who are you? He abruptly grabbed his coat. Ale, where are you going? Bianca yelped, grabbing her own purse. I'm leaving, he snapped, throwing a black Amex card on the table. Pay the bill. But hey, the pasta. I've lost my appetite. He stormed out of the restaurant, ignoring Julian's frantic, Sir, is everything all right? He burst onto the cold London street, his driver scrambling to open the door of the black Bentley Mulsanne. Where to, Mr. Moretti? Just drive, he commanded. Around the park. Now. He sank into the plush leather, his mind racing. It wasn't possible. That accent was dead, a relic of the old nobility. The families who had lost everything, or so he'd thought. The families he had spent his entire life trying to destroy, the ones he blamed for the ruin of his own. He had built a billion-dollar empire on one single burning motivation: revenge. Revenge on the people who spoke exactly like that. And one of them, was serving him risotto. He pulled out his phone. He didn't call Bianca. He called the one man he trusted. Marco, he said, his voice hard as steel. I have a new priority. Get to L'Etoile in Mayfair. Now, there is a waitress. Her name. Find out her name. Her tag said Elena. I want to know everything. Where she was born, who her parents are, what she ate for breakfast. And I want to know how she learned to speak like she owns Milan. Elena finished her shift at 2:00 a.m. The walk from the kitchen to the staff locker room felt like a mile. She hadn't been fired. Julian had simply stared at her, his face a mask of confusion. The rest of the staff gave her a wide berth, as if she had sprouted a second head. The story of the takedown on Table 7 was already restaurant legend. She expected a summons from Mr. Henderson, the general manager. It never came. Alessandro Moretti had paid the £800 bill, including the risotto he hadn't eaten, and left a £1,000 tip. It wasn't generosity, it was a power move, a signal that the cost meant nothing. But Eleanor knew she hadn't won. She had exposed herself. She traded her polished black shoes for worn-out sneakers. The ache in her bun finally released as she pulled the pins from her hair. She bundled her apron, the the smell of saffron and fear clinging to it. The night bus, the number 23, carried her from the unreal wealth of Mayfair to the stark reality of her life in Mile End. Her flat was a single room above a kebab shop, the air permanently laced with the smell of cumin and old grease. The lock on her door was flimsy. The linoleum in the tiny kitchenette was cracked. This was the life of Contessa Elara Vittoria di Sforza. She made a cup of weak tea and sat on her cot. From under the cot, she pulled a worn leather box. Inside was a single photograph, its edges softened by 1,000 touches. It was a photo of a man and a young girl, standing in front of a sprawling, sun-drenched villa. The girl, about 10 years old, was laughing, her hair a wild tangle of curls. The man, tall and kind-eyed, had his arm around her. Duca Lorenzo di Sforza, her papa. The villa was the Villa Sforza, their ancestral home on the outskirts of Milan for 500 years. It was all gone. Elena, Elara as she was then, was 20 when the scandal broke. Her father, the Duke, was the head of the Banca di Sforza, a private bank that had weathered wars, plagues, and recessions. It was a bastion of old-world integrity. Until it wasn't. The headlines had been brutal. Sforza Bank implodes. Duke of Milan accused of massive fraud. Billions vanished. Her father was accused of orchestrating a complex embezzlement scheme, using depositor funds to cover massive personal losses. He was ruined. The Sforza name, once synonymous with honor, was now synonymous with disgrace. But Elara knew the truth. Her father was a good man. A brilliant man, perhaps, but a terrible businessman. He was a poet and a historian, not a banker. He had been set up, framed by his new, ruthless partners who had promised to modernize the bank. They lost everything. The villa, the art, the name. Her father, he hadn't handled it. The shame had broken him. He suffered a complete mental collapse. He didn't even stand trial. He was institutionalized, a ghost of the man he was, living in a quiet, hideously expensive private clinic in Switzerland. And Elara, the Contessa, had become Elena, the waitress. She'd fled to London, vanishing into the anonymity of a service job, working 3 of them to pay the clinic's bills, to keep her father safe, to keep the last vestige of their family from crumbling completely. She was hiding from the press, from the creditors, from the men who had really stolen the money. She had built a fortress of invisibility. And tonight, a single plate of risotto had leveled it. Alessandro Moretti. She knew the name, of course. Everyone did. He was the new king of Milan, a self-made man, a predator. He was one of the investors who had circled the bleeding carcass of the Banca di Sforza, picking off assets for pennies on the dollar. He didn't just stumble into her restaurant. He was a vulture, and she had just revealed she was not, in fact, dead. A sharp, sudden knock echoed through her tiny flat. 2:30 a.m. Her blood ran cold. No one knocked on her door. Ever. "Who is it?" she called, her voice trembling. A man's voice, not Moretti's, replied. Smooth. Professional. "Miss Rossi? My name is Marco. I'm head of security for Mr. Moretti. He would like a word." He was here. He had found her. It had taken him less than 4 hours. I'm not dressed. It's the middle of the night." "He is waiting in the car, Miss Rossi. He is not a patient man. He asked me to give you this." Something slid under her door, a plain white envelope. Her hands shook as she picked it up. It wasn't heavy. She tore it open. Inside was not cash. It was a photograph, a recent one. It was a photo of her father, sitting on a bench in the clinic's garden in Switzerland. He looked frail, lost. It was a message. "I know who you are. I know where he is. I can reach you anywhere." It was a threat. Elena closed her eyes. The game was over. She opened the door. The man, Marco, was immaculate in a dark suit. He gestured to the stairwell. "This way, Contessa." The Bentley Mulsanne was an island of obscene luxury in the gritty mile-end street. The leather smelled like new money. The silence inside was absolute, a stark contrast to the thrum of the kebab shop's ventilator. Alessandro Moretti sat in the back, a shadow among shadows. He wasn't looking at her. He was staring out the window, a glass of amber liquid, whiskey, cognac, in his hand. Elena slid in, her heart a cold stone in her chest. She was still in her worn jeans and t-shirt. She felt like a stray cat dragged into a palace. "The Villa Sforza," he said, his voice quiet. He still hadn't looked at her. "I was there once, before, for a Christmas party. My father was the gardener." Elena's head snapped toward him. "What?" Now he turned. His espresso eyes were not angry. They were haunted. "My father was Giuseppe Moretti, head groundskeeper at the Villa Sforza for 30 years. He loved that land more than your father ever did. He tended the lemon trees. He cultivated the Sforza rose, the one your great-grandfather bred." Elena remembered him, a quiet, sun-weathered man with kind eyes. Beppe. He used to let her pick the ripe figs. "He was a good man," Elena whispered. "He was a loyal man," Alessandro corrected, his voice hardening. "And when your father's partners, the Baron Vescovi and his consortium, started their creative accounting, who did they need to sign the false invoices? The transport manifests? The landscaping budgets that were inflated by 1,000%? Elena felt sick. She knew where this was going. Your father, the Duca, was too busy reading poetry to notice, Alessandro said, his voice dripping with a lifetime of resentment. He just signed what was put in front of him. But they needed a details man, a scapegoat, someone to take the first fall. So they went to my father. They offered him money. He refused. He loved your family. He believed in the Sforza name. Alessandro took a sharp drink. So they framed him. They planted forged documents in his cottage. They claimed he was the mastermind, the simple gardener who was secretly siphoning millions. By the time the larger fraud came to light, my father was already the primary suspect. "No," Elena breathed. "I didn't know." "Of course you didn't," he snapped. "You were in the villa. We were in the cottage. When the police came, your father did nothing. He hid. He let them take Beppe. He let them take my father away. My mother and I were evicted from the grounds the next day, thrown out like spazzatura. Garbage. My father." Alessandro's voice cracked, just for a second. "He died in San Vittore prison. A heart attack, they said. He was 52. He died in shame, branded a thief, while your father got to plead insanity and hide in a luxury Swiss clinic." The silence in the car was suffocating. It all crashed into place for Elena. The wolf of Milan, his ruthless drive, his obsession with buying back pieces of the old aristocracy. It wasn't ambition. It was a scorched earth campaign of revenge. He was burning down the world that had burned his father. "You're wrong," Elena said, her voice shaking but finding its strength. "My father was a victim, just like yours. He was broken by it. He is broken. He's alive," Alessandro countered. "He's comfortable. My father is a name in a pauper's grave." "And you," Elena said, realization dawning. "You're buying up the Sforza assets, the bank, the properties. You're not a vulture. You're trying to get your father's cottage back." His face hardened. "I'm taking back what was stolen from my family." "It wasn't my family that stole it," Elena insisted, leaning forward. "It was Vescovi, Silvio Vescovi. He's the one. He framed your father to start the fraud, and he framed my father to finish it. He's the one who walked away with everything." Alessandro stared at her, his mind clearly warring with 2 decades of cultivated hatred. "Vescovi," he said, the name tasting like poison. "He's untouchable. He's a barone. He's clean. I've had my lawyers looking for years. There's no paper trail." "Because you were looking for a link to my father," Elena said, her mind working faster than it had in years. The fog of her waitress life was burning away. "You assumed they were partners, but they weren't. My father was his victim. Your father was his shield." They stared at each other, the billionaire and the waitress, the gardener's son and the duke's daughter. 2 halves of the same tragedy, sitting in a Bentley in Mile End. "Silvio Vescovi," Elena said, her voice turning to ice. "He's the one who should be in prison. Not your father. He's the one who should be broken. Not mine." Alessandro Moretti watched her. The subservient waitress was gone. In her place sat a contessa with a core of steel. He saw his own rage, his own focus, reflected back at him. "Vescovi is hosting his annual Ballo d'autunno," Alessandro said, thinking aloud. "At his villa on Lake Como. Next week. It's the biggest event of the season. He's invited me. He wants my investment in his new tech fund." "He's laundering the money," Elena said instantly. "The Sforza money." "Probably. And he's invited you," Elena continued, "the son of the man he framed, to invest. The arrogance. The schifo. He thinks I'm like him. He thinks the past is the past." A dangerous, terrible, and brilliant idea began to form in the space between them. "He won't be expecting me," Elena said. "He'll have security. He won't let you within a kilometre of his villa," Alessandro countered. "Not if I'm Elena Rossi, the waitress. But what if I'm not?" Alessandro looked at her, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face for the first time. It transformed him. "He'll recognize you," Alessandro said. "He'll recognize Elara di Sforza," she corrected, "the broken, destitute daughter. He won't be expecting the Contessa." Alessandro picked up his phone. He didn't call Marco, he called his pilot. "Get the Gulfstream G650 ready. We're flying to Milan." He hung up and looked at Elena. "There is one problem," he said. "What?" "You're dressed like this. If you're going to walk into that ballo as a Sforza, you need to look like a Sforza. And I," he said, a glint in his eye, "am going to enjoy this." "Enjoy what?" "The makeover. We're going to Bond Street. Then we go to war." The next 48 hours were a surreal blur. Elena felt less like a person and more like a high-stakes project. Alessandro Moretti's London penthouse at One Hyde Park was a sterile, glass-walled box in the sky, overlooking a city she had only ever seen from the ground up. "First," Alessandro declared, striding into the living room with an iPad, "we fix this." He gestured vaguely at her. "Fix what?" Elena said, crossing her arms, her waitress-worn T-shirt feeling paper-thin in the opulent room. "Everything. The hair, the clothes, the fatigue." Within an hour, the penthouse was filled with people. A hairstylist named Antoine, flown in from Paris, who clucked his tongue at her split ends. A makeup artist. A tailor. "No," Elena said, as the hairstylist brandished a pair of scissors. "What? No?" Alessandro asked, annoyed. "No. Elara di Sforza would not have a fashionable cut. She's in mourning. She's in hiding. She's a contessa, not an influencer. The hair stays up. Simple, elegant, severe." Alessandro paused, surprised. He nodded to Antoine. "Do what she says." Next came the clothes. Racks of designer gowns were wheeled in. Gucci, Prada, Valentino. Elena shook her head at all of them. Too new. Too loud. "What is this?" Alessandro said, exasperated, holding up a sparkling, backless Versace. "This is what Bianca would wear." "Exactly," Elena said. "Vescovi will be expecting a woman like Bianca on your arm. He'll be expecting a trophy. He needs to see a threat." She walked past the racks and stopped at a single dress, a deep, midnight blue velvet gown by a designer so old school he was almost forgotten. It was high-necked, long-sleeved, and utterly severe. "This one," she said. "It's a nun's dress," Alessandro protested. "It's a queen's dress," Elena countered. "It's armor, and—" She rooted through a box of accessories. "This." She pulled out a simple, heavy, gold and lapis lazuli necklace. It was vintage. Alessandro stared at it. That's the Sforza crest." "I know," Elena said. "It was in the Sforza collection. You bought it at auction, didn't you, along with all the other family jewels?" He had. He had been buying back her family's history as an act of conquest. "Put it on," he commanded. She fastened the heavy necklace. The transformation was complete. The worn-down waitress was gone. In the mirror stood a woman of terrifying poise and aristocratic beauty. She looked like she belonged on a Renaissance coin. Alessandro was silent for a full minute. He saw for the first time the woman who had spoken to him in the restaurant. "It's missing one thing," he said. He went to his safe. He returned with a small, velvet box. Inside, on a bed of silk, were 2 teardrop-shaped diamond earrings. "The Sforza tears," Elena whispered. "They were legendary. They were supposed to have been lost." "I found them," he said simply, "in a private collection in Dubai. They are yours. Alone." As she put them on, their fingers brushed. An electric current passed between them, sharp and unexpected. It wasn't romantic. It was the shock of 2 high-voltage wires touching. They were both predators, and they were finally hunting the same prey. The flight to Milan on the Gulf Stream was a war room meeting. "Marco has been digging," Alessandro said, passing her a tablet. "Vescovi's tech fund is a ghost. It's a series of shell corporations running through Malta, Panama, and ending in a private vault in Zurich." "The same vault my father's lawyers said the Sforza assets vanished into," Elena noted. "Exactly. He's been sitting on the money for 20 years. Now he's trying to legitimize it. He needs clean investors like me to mix with his dirty money. Once my capital is in, it's all just Vescovi Global Tech. So we need to stop the transfer." "More than that," Alessandro said, his eyes dark. "We need to get it back, not just the money. We need a confession. We need to clear your father's name, and my father's." "He'll never confess. He's too smart." "He's arrogant," Alessandro corrected. "And he has a weakness, his study at the villa. Marco's intel says he keeps all his private ledgers there, the real ones, not on a computer, in a safe. Old world. Like my father. Exactly. He trusts paper. So how do we get to it? The place will be a fortress during the party." "It will. He'll have his own security, plus private hires." "But," Alessandro said, a small smile playing on his lips, "he doesn't know that my head of security is the best digital infiltration expert in Europe. Marco is already inside." "What?" "He's been on Vescovi's private security team for 2 weeks as a consultant. He's mapping their systems right now." Elena stared at him. "You've been planning this. You've been after Vescovi." "I've been after everyone," Alessandro said. "I didn't know who the real snake was. I just knew the Sforza name was at the center of it. Then you clarified things for me, in the restaurant." The plan was simple and insane. 1. Alessandro and Elena would arrive at the Ballo. 2. Alessandro would keep Vescovi occupied, talking about the investment. 3. Elena would create a diversion. 4. During the diversion, Marco would disable the silent alarms to the study. 5. Elena would have a 10-minute window to find the safe, get the ledgers, and get out. A diversion? Elena asked. What kind of diversion? That, Alessandro said. You will have to improvise. You're the Contessa. I'm sure you'll think of something. Villa d'Este on Lake Como was not a house. It was a statement. A sprawling Renaissance masterpiece of terraced gardens, priceless frescoes, and staggering arrogance. Tonight it was lit up like a beacon, a monument to Silvio Vescovi's stolen empire. The Bentley, this time his Italian one, pulled up the cypress-lined drive. "Showtime," Alessandro murmured. He was in a perfectly tailored Brioni tuxedo. He looked like a king. "Just remember," Elena said, her voice steady, though her heart was pounding against her ribs. "We are not his guests. We are his judges." Alessandro looked at her, at the fire in her eyes, the Sforza diamonds at her ears. "For my father, Giuseppe," he said. "For my father, Lorenzo," she replied. He stepped out and offered her his hand. She took it. The paparazzi, held back by a velvet rope, exploded in a sea of flashes. "Moretti! Moretti! Who is she?" "Signor Moretti. A new woman?" They ignored them, gliding up the marble steps. Silvio Vescovi stood at the entrance, greeting his guests. He was in his 60s, with a mane of silver hair, a predatory charm, and the cold eyes of a shark. He was the man who had haunted her nightmares. He saw Alessandro, and his face lit up in a false, buttery smile. "Alessandro, mio caro, you came. I am so glad. We have much to discuss." "Silvio," Alessandro said, his voice a smooth baritone, clasping his arm. "A lovely home. I try. And who is this vision?" Vescovi turned his shark-like gaze on Elena. His smile faltered. His eyes widened just for a fraction of a second. The recognition was instant, and so was the confusion. "Barone Vescovi," Elena said, her voice like chilled champagne. She did not offer her hand. "Ilara," Vescovi said, recovering, though his color was high. "Contessa Ilara di Sforza. Dio mio, I haven't seen you since... Well, my dear girl, what a surprise." "I'm sure it is," Elena said. "And you are with Signor Moretti?" Vescovi's mind was clearly racing, trying to put the pieces together. "Ilara is an old family friend," Alessandro said smoothly, his hand resting proprietarily on the small of her back. "I'm helping her re-establish herself." The lie was perfect. Vescovi's face relaxed, then morphed into a look of oily understanding. Ah. He assumed Moretti had taken the destitute daughter of his old enemy as a mistress, a final act of conquest. The thought appealed to his own dark sense of irony. "How wonderful," Vescovi smirked. "A story of redemption. Please enjoy. We will talk later, Alessandro." As they walked into the grand ballroom, a string quartet playing Vivaldi, Elena whispered. "He's disgusting. He thinks I'm your... Let him," Alessandro whispered back. "It makes him underestimate you. It makes him comfortable. Now, mingle. I need to find Marco." For an hour, Elena played the part of the ghost. Old acquaintances of her family stared, whispered, and avoided her. She was a pariah, a reminder of a scandal they all profited from. She held her head high, the Sforza necklace a heavy, comforting weight. At 10:15 p.m., Alessandro found her on the terrace. "It's time," he said. "Marco is in position. Vescovi is in the library with his finance minister, bragging. I'm going in to talk numbers. I'll get him on the terrace. That's your cue. The study is on the second floor, west wing. You have 10 minutes. And the diversion? You'll know the moment." Alessandro walked back inside. Elena watched him go, then looked out over the placid, dark waters of Lake Como. She followed, a minute later. She saw them, Alessandro and Vescovi, standing by the large open terrace doors, Vescovi holding a cigar, laughing at something. Marco, dressed as a guard, was at the far end of the hall. He gave an imperceptible nod. Elena walked to the center of the grand ballroom. She took a deep breath. She needed to do something no one would expect, something that would stop the party. She saw the conductor of the string quartet. She walked directly to him. "Excuse me," she said, in clear, authoritative Italian. The conductor, annoyed, turned. "Signora, I have a request." She slipped a €100 note into his pocket. "Play Nessun Dorma, now." "But signora, this is not an opera." "Play it," she commanded, with the authority of a woman used to being obeyed. He stammered, then nodded. The Vivaldi screeched to a halt. The musicians, confused, rustled their papers. The conductor tapped his baton. A few seconds later, the sweeping, dramatic, and thunderously emotional opening notes of Puccini's Nessun Dorma filled the ballroom. The crowd, which had been buzzing with conversation, fell silent. It was a bizarre, jarring choice. It was Eleanor's diversion. But it wasn't the diversion. As the music began to swell, Eleanor walked to the center of the room, and she began to sing. She wasn't a professional, but a Sforza, a Contessa, was trained in everything. Her voice, a rich, clear mezzo-soprano, was not just powerful, it was filled with 20 years of pain, rage, and loss. "None shall sleep, none shall sleep." The entire party froze. Jaws dropped. Alessandro and Vescovi on the terrace turned. Vescovi looked confused, then annoyed. "What is this? Is she drunk?" Elena sang, her eyes fixed on Vescovi. She sang of the night, of the stars, of a secret that must be kept, and of the dawn that would bring victory. "But my secret is hidden within me." She was, in that moment, magnificent and terrifying. A banshee in blue velvet. As the orchestra hit the crescendo, she held the high note, a cry of defiance that echoed off the frescoed ceilings. When the final note faded, there was a stunned, absolute silence. And then she fainted. A perfect, theatrical, dead-weight collapse onto the marble floor. The room erupted. "Someone help her! Get a doctor! Contessa!" Vescovi and Alessandro rushed in. "Elara!" Alessandro yelled, playing his part perfectly, dropping to his knees. "Guards, get water! Clear the room!" Vescovi bellowed. In the chaos, no one saw Marco slip away from his post and sprint up the main staircase. No one saw Elena, on the floor, open one eye and give Alessandro the faintest of winks. The diversion was complete. The clock was ticking. "Take her to my study," Vescovi ordered, his face a mask of social panic. "It's on the second floor. It's quiet. She needs air. A doctor." This was a disaster, a stroke of luck. Alessandro was about to agree when he realized the flaw. "No," he said, his voice sharp with manufactured concern, already lifting Elena from the floor. The scent of her hair, expensive shampoo, and a faint trace of fear filled his nostrils. "The study is too far, too full of your cigars." He injected a note of disdain. "The nearest guest room, now. She's white as a sheet." "Yes, yes, of course," Vescovi said, waving them off, already turning to his party to calm the murmuring tide. "The Tigno suite, top of the stairs to the left. I'll have a doctor sent up immediately." Alessandro nodded, his face a mask of a distraught lover, and carried her up the sweeping marble staircase. The weight of her in his arms was negligible, but the weight of their mission was colossal. The moment they turned the corner, out of sight of the ballroom, Elena's eyes snapped open. "He's sending a doctor," she hissed. "We have minutes, maybe less." "Put me down, Alessandro. I'm not made of glass." He set her on her feet in the plush, carpeted hallway. Her faint had been a masterpiece. Her Nessun Dorma had been a war cry. Now she was all business. The Tigno suite was to their left. The West Wing, and the study, was to their right. "This way," he said. They moved like ghosts, two dark figures against the ancestral portraits of Vescovi's stolen life. The music from the party was a distant, frantic pulse. The West Wing was, as Marco had promised, deserted. A single guard, one of Marco's consultants, was conveniently missing from his post. The study door was a magnificent, carved oak monstrosity, and it was locked. "The digital keypad is dark," Alessandro said, running his fingers over it. Marco disabled the network, but the physical lock— "Allow me," Elena said. She reached up to her hair, her hands steady, and pulled a single, long, steel-grey pin from the heart of her severe chignon. It was not a bobby pin. It was a high-tensile lockpick. "You're full of surprises, Contessa," he murmured. "My father's clinic costs 400,000 euros a year," she replied, her voice cold, her focus absolute as she knelt at the lock. "I didn't just learn to serve wine. I learned to be practical." She probed the lock. It was an old, complex, Sforza-era design. A lock Vescovi had likely salvaged from her own family's villa as a trophy. She felt the pins, her mind as cold and clear as the lake outside. Click, thunk, clack. She wasn't just opening a door, she was reclaiming a key. Click. The heavy mechanism turned. The door swung open silently. The study was a tomb of Vescovi's arrogance. It smelled of old leather, stale cigar smoke, and a faint, acrid hint of lemon oil furniture polish. It was a pathetic imitation of her father's own library. "The painting," Alessandro said, striding to a large, dark Titian that depicted a scene of betrayal. "He's a cliché." He lifted the heavy frame. Behind it was not an old-world tumbler, but a flat, biometric, digital safe. "Marco couldn't crack this one without Vescovi's fingerprint or a 10-digit PIN," Alessandro said, his voice tight. "We don't have time for this." "We don't need time. We need his ego," Elena said. Her eyes scanned the room, dismissing the antique desk, the awards, the crystal decanters. She was profiling him. She walked to a small side table. On it sat a single, silver-framed digital photo frame, cycling through images of Vescovi. On a yacht with a politician accepting an award. "He's a narcissist," she whispered. "What?" "He wouldn't want his maids or his mistresses messing with his photos." She unplugged the frame. The screen went black. "Elena, what are you doing? We need the safe." "Shh." She plugged it back in. The screen lit up. A prompt appeared. "Enter 6-digit PIN to access settings." Alessandro swore, a low note of pure admiration. "The date. What's the date?" "The day the Sforza Bank collapsed." Elena typed it in. 10/14/2004. "Incorrect PIN." "Damn it," Alessandro hissed. "Think. His birthday?" "No, too simple." "What's the other date?" Alessandro said, his eyes going dark. "The date he started all this. The day my father was arrested." Elena's fingers flew. 02/05. 2003. "PIN accepted." "He's lazy," Elena said, a grim smile touching her lips. "He's arrogant, and he's lazy. He uses the same PIN for everything." She ran to the safe. She typed in 02/05/003. A heavy, oiled thunk echoed in the room. The safe door clicked open. It was all there. Not cash, but something infinitely more valuable. 3 thick, leather-bound ledgers, the real ones. The ones that detailed the offshore accounts, the shell companies, and the final destination in Zurich. Elena grabbed them, pulling them to her chest. They felt as heavy as tombstones. "We have them. Let's go." "Wait," Alessandro said. He pulled a slim black USB drive from his tuxedo jacket. He doesn't just deserve to be jailed. He deserves to be ruined. He plugged the drive into a port on the back of Vescovi's desktop. Marco's a genius. This is a ghost drive. It's copying his entire hard drive, everything, all his other clean deals. The tiny light on the drive blinked. Blink, blink. Alessandro, we can't. We have the ledgers. That's enough. It's not enough for my father, he said, his voice a low growl. Blink, blink. 5 more seconds. And then they heard it. Footsteps, not the nervous shuffling of a doctor, but the heavy, furious, pounding on the carpet footsteps of their host. He's coming, Elena whispered, her blood turning to ice. It's done. Alessandro ripped the drive from the port. They looked at the door, then at the window. The terrace, Elena said, pointing to the French doors. They didn't hesitate. They burst onto the small, private stone terrace. They were trapped. It was a 20-foot drop into a dark, manicured rose garden below. They could hear the study door fly open, crashing against the wall. Going somewhere? They turned. Silvio Vescovi stood in the doorway, framed in the yellow light from the study. He was not alone. 2 of his private security guards flanked him, and in Vescovi's hand, gleaming under the moonlight, was a small, silver pistol. So, Vescovi said, his oily charm replaced by a cold, reptilian fury. The Contessa and the Jardiniere's boy, how perfect, how utterly, predictably dramatic. He stepped onto the terrace. Your Nessun Dorma, Alara. Truly touching. A bit shrieky on the high note, but the passion? Magnificent. And the faint? A masterpiece. I was almost convinced. He took another step. But I had a guard check the Signo suite. Imagine my surprise when he found it. Empty. And then I remembered my safe. My real safe. His eyes flickered to the ledgers in Elena's arms. Hand them over, he snarled. And the drive, Alessandro. I know your tricks. Put them on the balustrade. Slowly. It's over, Silvio, Alessandro said, moving to stand slightly in front of Elena. The Guardia di Finanza are on their way. Vescovi let out a short, sharp laugh. A bluff. You have nothing. I am a barone. You are the daughter of a disgraced, insane thief and the son of a dead one. Who will they believe? They'll believe my father, Elena said. Her voice cut through the night, sharp and cold as ice. Vescovi's laugh died. What? Your father is a vegetable in a Swiss postcard. He was, Elena corrected, her voice ringing with a power she hadn't known she possessed. You think I've been working as a waitress for fun? I've been keeping him safe. I've been keeping him alive. But 2 weeks ago, Signor Moretti paid the Clinica bonus, 5 million euros, for experimental treatment. It's amazing what the world's best neurologists can do when money is no object. You're lying, Vescovi hissed, but a bead of sweat was tracing its way down his temple. Am I? Elena said. He started talking a week ago, Silvio, and he hasn't stopped. He's been talking to the Swiss authorities. He remembers everything. He remembers the papers you forced him to sign. He remembers the threats you made against me. He remembers you. Vescovi's face contorted. This was the one variable he couldn't have planned for. He was cornered, a cornered animal. It doesn't matter, he snarled, raising the pistol. A dead woman and a broken old man can't testify. He aimed the gun. Not at Elena, at Alessandro, the real threat. No, Elena screamed, lunging for him. A single sharp crack echoed over the lake. It wasn't Vescovi's gun. Vescovi froze. He looked down at his pristine white dinner jacket. A small red dot glowed on his chest. He looked up, confused, toward the dark gardens below. A thwip sound, almost comical, cut the air, and a small dart sprouted from his shoulder. "Drop it, Barone," a voice called out from the shadows of a cypress tree. Marco stepped into the moonlight, a high-powered tranquilizer rifle resting on his shoulder. Mine is quieter, and I never miss. Vescovi's pistol clattered to the stone as his eyes rolled back and his knees buckled. The two security guards, seeing the game was over, put their hands up as if by reflex. As if summoned by the silence, the distant sound of sirens grew into a deafening wail. Flashing blue lights, Guardia di Finanza and Carabinieri were screaming up the long, cypress-lined drive. Alessandro coolly checked his watch. Right on time. You did call them, Elena breathed. "I did better," Alessandro said, dusting off his tuxedo. "They've been in a catering van at the end of the drive for 2 hours. They had a live feed from Marco's body cam. They were just waiting for a clear and present felony. I believe Vescovi pointing a gun at us qualifies." He bent down and picked up the fallen ledgers from beside the unconscious Barone. He looked at the man who had ruined both their families, a look of profound, cold dismissal on his face. "You insulted my father's memory," he said to the sleeping form, "and you made her serve you risotto." He straightened up. "You have the manners of a barbone." They stood on the terrace, 2 soldiers in evening wear, watching as the armed police flooded the ballroom, arresting Vescovi's associates and seizing the computers. The party guests, a sea of diamonds and confusion, were being herded onto the lawn. It was over. "He's right, you know," Elena said, her voice shaking, the adrenaline finally leaving her. "All of this. It was illegal. Breaking and entering. Theft. Hacking." "No," Alessandro said, turning to her. He held out the ledgers. "It was justice. My lawyers will call it a citizen's recovery of stolen property. We were the victims. Now we're just... not." She took the ledgers. They were heavy, the physical, tangible weight of 20 years of her life. "What now, Contessa?" he asked, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. She looked at him. The Wolf of Milan. The gardener's son, the man who had, in the strangest way possible, given her her life back. "My name is Eleanor," she said, a tear finally tracing a path through her makeup. "And I need to see my father. The jet is waiting at Linate," he said simply, as if it were a taxi. "And you?" she asked. "What will you do?" "Me?" Alessandro looked out at the lake, where the first hint of dawn was painting the sky. "The Sforza Bank is a ruin, a shell. I think I'll rebuild it. But I need someone to run it. Someone who knows the Sforza name. Someone who knows the difference between a cheap fraud and real, lasting value." He looked at her, his dark espresso eyes finally clear of old ghosts. Someone who knows when the saffron is wrong. Elena allowed herself a small, tired but very real smile. "I'm not a banker, Alessandro. I'm a waitress." "You're a Sforza," he corrected, "and you're the most formidable person I've ever met. The choice is yours, a penthouse in Milan or a flat above a kebab shop." "First," Elena said, holding the ledgers tighter, "Switzerland, to see my father. After that, we can talk about the bank." He nodded. "Switzerland." They stood there, not touching, as the sun began to break over the water, staining the sky a delicate, perfect shade of saffron gold. The long night was finally over. The dawn had come. And just like that, the waitress who was a contessa and the billionaire who was a gardener's son rewrote their history. They didn't just expose a criminal, they reclaimed their names. This wasn't a fairy tale ending. It wasn't about a prince saving a princess. It was about 2 broken people, bound by a shared past, who became a force of nature. They proved that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't wealth or status. It's a memory. It's the truth. And it's an accent that reminds you exactly who you are. What did you think of Elena's revenge? Was Alessandro right to do what he did? Let me know your favorite part of their story in the comments below. If you loved this story of drama, twists, and justice, please show your support. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who loves a story of epic revenge, and most importantly, subscribe to this channel for more incredible stories every week. Don't forget to ring the bell so you never miss an update.